seagulls wheeled over the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle, Washington, their cries slicing through the damp morning air like desperate prayers. Marina Alvarez pulled her thrift store coat tighter around her body, but the stubborn gap in the front refused to close. November in the Pacific Northwest had a way of finding skin, of settling into bones until warmth became a distant memory. The docks smelled of wet rope and diesel, mingling with coffee from the corner kiosk that drifted like a promise no one intended to keep. Her inheritance sat before her, a scuffed, decommissioned mini-submarine, its paint flaking to gray scales against the dark water. It looked wounded, forgotten, a metal beast abandoned to the elements. People from the nearby luxury condos paused during their morning walks, dogs tugging at leashes, while their owners smirked and snapped photos with expensive phones. Marina heard their whispers, felt their stares prickling against her back. "Quite the fortune," drawled Sterling Caldwell, the marina's immaculate manager. His cashmere scarf hung bone white against a perfectly tailored navy peacoat, not a thread out of place. He gestured toward the sub with manicured fingers, eyes narrowing as if the vessel might somehow stain him just by proximity. "From a junkyard uncle to a junkyard heir. You planning to put it in your living room?" Laughter rippled behind him from boat owners in clean deck shoes and designer sunglasses, the sound thin and brittle as ice cracking in a glass. The mockery wasn't even trying to disguise itself as humor. Marina's jaw tightened. Her fingers, numb from the cold, curled into her palms. She had taken the first bus here at dawn, leaving 10-year-old Lucia asleep in their rented apartment, hoping to spare her daughter the public humiliation that now unfolded like a slow-motion accident. The probate clerk seemed quite entertained, Sterling continued, his voice carrying deliberately to the gathering audience. Said it was the first submarine they'd ever processed. He pronounced submarine with a lilt that made it sound absurd, a child's toy rather than the last gift from a complicated man. The probate clerk's indifferent voice still echoed in Marina's mind. Asset transferred, Ms. Alvarez, as if her life were a file to be stamped and shelved, her struggles nothing more than paperwork. A gull landed on the conning tower with a flutter, pecked at something invisible, then took off with a flap and a complaint that sounded oddly like her own internal voice. Uncle Elliot had been odd, even by Seattle standards. A dockside scavenger who fixed things people called lost causes. His hands always smelled of machine oil and salt, his pockets filled with washers and copper wire. He appeared at their door sometimes with groceries or a fixed toaster, a gruff nod his only explanation. Now she owned his last embarrassment. Marina placed her palm on the hull. The metal radiated night cold, the chill traveled up her arm and settled somewhere behind her sternum. Around her, the harbor clinked with halyards, water slapped against pilings, and a sour wind moved off Puget Sound, bringing the smell of distance and something vaguely industrial. Best pay to haul that away before it sinks, Sterling added, lips tilting in what passed for a smile. Disposal fees aren't getting any cheaper. And we wouldn't want an environmental incident. The words hung in the air, barbed and expectant. Marina said nothing. Her silence wasn't calculated. It was all she had left after the bus ride, after the months of cleaning other people's homes, after the eviction notice taped to their door last week. Words felt expensive, and she couldn't afford them. Something shifted in the atmosphere. The laughter ended, not because anyone grew suddenly kind, but because the air thickened with a silence heavy enough to feel. It held the first spark of indignation that makes strangers look away, uncomfortable with their own cruelty made visible. A woman in running clothes lowered her phone, slid it into her pocket. An older man with a golden retriever tugged his dog away, suddenly interested in a boat across the marina. Sterling's smile faltered at the edges, revealing the effort behind it. Marina turned her back to them all, facing the submarine, her submarine now. The hatch stood open like a question. Inside would be darkness, cold metal, and whatever ghosts Uncle Elliot had left behind. But it was hers. In a life where she owned so little outright, this bizarre inheritance was something no one could take away. I'll be back tomorrow, she said to no one in particular, her voice low and steady. With tools. She walked away, steps measured, back straight. The mockery had burned, yes, but fire could warm as well as destroy. As she passed the coffee kiosk, the vendor, a woman with gray-threaded hair and eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize dignity when it walked by, held out a steaming cup. On the house, she said simply. Looks like you inherited a story, not just a submarine. Marina took the cup, the heat seeping into her frozen fingers. Thank you, she whispered, the words no longer feeling so expensive. Behind her, Sterling was already turning away, his audience dispersing like smoke and wind. But the submarine remained, stubbornly present in the water, refusing to apologize for existing. Marina took a sip of coffee, bitter and strong, and let it warm her from inside. Tomorrow would come with its own troubles. For now, she had this moment of small kindness, this strange inheritance, and the memory of Uncle Elliot, who had always believed that what people throw away often contains its own stubborn kind of worth. Marina's story had always been told in quiet rooms. Laundromat chairs where fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects, borrowed couches that smelled of other people's detergent, a hospital lobby where she waited while Lucia's fever broke at 3 a.m. The hum of vending machines had kept her company through that endless night, their glow painting her face in shades of artificial dawn. She was born in Yakima to farm workers who rose before sunrise and came home with dirt embedded in the lines of their palms. From them, she learned early to measure the day by what survived. Which clothes could be mended, which vegetables were still firm enough to cook, which dreams could withstand one more postponement. A cracked brass compass sat on her dresser, its needle stuck a few degrees off north, the last thing her father had given her before he walked down the driveway and never returned. It had become a small shrine to broken hope, the glass spidered from a fall during the eviction 2 years ago, when the landlord's men had stacked their belongings on a sidewalk wet with February rain. We don't need much space, Lucia had said that day, her voice small but determined, as they carried what they could to the bus stop. Just enough for us and my notebooks. The child's practicality had nearly broken Marina's heart. Now they lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Crown Hill where the bathroom faucet never fully stopped dripping, and the neighbor's television mumbled through the wall until midnight. Lucia slept in the bedroom. Marina took the fold-out sofa that left imprints of its metal bars across her back. On workdays, she caught the 5:15 bus to Magnolia and Queen Anne, where she cleaned houses that smelled of lemon polish and money that never noticed her. The vacuum's drone followed her through rooms larger than their entire apartment, past framed photos of smiling families on tropical beaches, beside refrigerators covered with private school calendars and sports schedules. Your English is quite good, one woman had told her last month, surprise lifting her carefully penciled eyebrows. Where did you learn it? Seattle Public Schools, Marina had answered, continuing to scrub the bathroom tile. She didn't add that she'd been born 3 miles away, or that she'd once been halfway through a teaching degree before her mother's cancer ate their savings and spit out medical debt. She packed lunches that smelled of peanut butter and apples, taped Lucy's spelling words to the refrigerator, told bedtime stories about lighthouse keepers and women who fixed engines when boats broke down at sea. She believed in dignity because it was one of the few things left she could choose. Lucia believed in her. The girl kept a notebook decorated with fairy stickers and little drawings of orcas. On the first page she'd written in careful letters, "Things we will have someday." "We'll get our own place with a porch," Lucia would say, her breath fogging the bus window while the city's cranes lifted the sky higher, building luxury apartments for people they would never be. "You can drink coffee there that smells like chocolate, not that gross stuff from work." Marina would smile and nod because the bottom alternative was to cry, and she had promised herself she would not cry where Lucia could see. Uncle Elliot had always been a rumor of grease and raincoats, appearing with a knuckles wrap and leaving with a shrug. He smelled of motor oil and something Marina could never identify. Maybe loneliness, maybe purpose. He fixed their toaster once, rewiring it with hands that trembled slightly, refusing dinner but accepting a cup of tea that he held without drinking. "Your dad was the talker," he'd told her once. "I got the fixing gene instead of the talking one." When he died, the will named one grand bequest, the mini-sub he'd hauled years ago from a military auction, promising he'd turn it into something magnificent. The lawyer had almost seemed embarrassed to tell her, his voice dropping as if delivering news of a scandal rather than an inheritance. The world laughed. Marina did not. She had learned that what people throw away often hides its own stubborn kind of light. "What does it look like?" Lucia had asked, eyes wide with curiosity, over cereal that was getting soggy. "Like something that doesn't fit," Marina answered. "Like something waiting." So she went to Ballard, pocketing the compass like a talisman, and told Lucia that sometimes you look ridiculous on the path to change. The bus had been nearly empty that morning, just her and a man in healthcare scrubs sleeping against the window, his face slack with exhaustion that Marina recognized in her own mirror. Seattle passed by in a blur of coffee shops and construction, the Space Needle appearing and disappearing between buildings like a memory trying to surface. "Your uncle was a strange bird," the probate clerk had said, shuffling papers with disinterested efficiency. Her fingernails were perfect ovals, painted the color of strawberry candy. "No beneficiaries except you. No other assets except that vessel." Marina signed where indicated, her signature careful and deliberate. "He liked to fix things," she said, though the clerk hadn't asked. "Well," the woman replied, sliding the final form into a folder, "let's hope this one's fixable." That evening, after Sterling and his audience had dispersed, Marina stood on the dock looking at the submarine. The light was fading, turning the water to hammered metal. A fine mist had begun to fall, not quite rain, but enough to bead on her eyelashes. The submarine looked both absurd and dignified, like an old man wearing a tuxedo to a fast food restaurant. "What were you thinking, Elliot?" she whispered. The sub offered no answer, just the creak of its mooring lines and the gentle slap of water against its hull. A night heron landed on a nearby piling, its reflection rippling below. It watched her with an eye like polished stone, unblinking and ancient. Marina felt a sudden kinship with this solitary hunter, patient in the gathering dark. They both knew what it meant to wait, to look for what others missed. She walked back to the bus stop, the compass heavy in her pocket. Above, stars struggled against the city's light pollution, faint but persistent. Tomorrow she would bring Lucia to see their inheritance. Tomorrow they would begin whatever story the submarine was trying to tell them. For tonight, she would fold sheets over the sofa's metal frame and dream of instruments that forgot how to point north, but remembered how to signal home. Humiliation has a way of multiplying, let's all like mice behind kitchen walls. 3 days after her visit to the marina, the city sent a notice. The submarine was a hazard. Removal required within 14 days, or face fines that started at $500. The paper was crisp and official, the language as cold as the water surrounding her inheritance. Sterling had delivered it personally, highlighting the relevant section with a neat, unnecessary flourish of yellow marker. "Tug and scrap fees," he murmured, standing too close on the dock, close enough that Marina could smell his cologne, something expensive that reminded her of the houses she cleaned. "They run high this time of year." Supply and demand. His smile never reached his eyes, which remained flat and anticipatory, like a cat watching a wounded bird. Marina imagined the bill rising like a tide over a house built too close to shore. She nodded without speaking and took the notice, folding it precisely along its creases before slipping it into her coat pocket next to the compass. Her silence seemed to disappoint Sterling, who had clearly expected either anger or tears. Rent, already late, glared at her from a red-letter email on her phone screen. The landlord's voicemail, "We need responsible tenants, Ms. Alvarez," crowded her ear like a stranger standing too close on a bus. The same words she'd heard 2 years ago, before they'd lost the last place. The familiar knot formed in her stomach, dread mixed with determination. She cleaned a penthouse that week in a building where the elevator played classical music and the hallway carpet swallowed all sound. The orchids on the kitchen island smelled faintly of soap, their white blooms impossibly perfect against the marble countertop. The owner, a tech investor with a soft voice and 3 identical blue shirts hanging in his closet, tossed his jacket on a chair and never looked her in the face, speaking through her as he talked on his phone about numbers too large to imagine. "Yes, we'll need to pivot," he was saying as she dusted around him. The margins aren't sustainable. On the bus home, urine and old coffee mingled in the air. An argument sparked 2 rows back, the words sharp and tinny in the enclosed space. Marina pressed the compass into her palm until it hurt, feeling the cracked glass against her lifeline. Lucia would be finishing school now, waiting at the after-school program where the lights were too bright and the snacks were always stale crackers with processed cheese. That night, after Lucia had fallen asleep surrounded by her notebooks and pencil shavings, Marina returned to the marina. The security guard, an older man with kind eyes and a thermos of what smelled like soup, nodded as she passed, pretending not to see her. The docks were quiet except for the gentle percussion of water against wood and hull, a lullaby for boats and their absent owners. She slid into the submarine's open hatch with a headlamp she'd bought at the dollar store, the elastic band already stretching after just one use. The beam of light cut through darkness that smelled of cold and metal, revealing a cramped interior where every surface curved away from her. Condensation beaded on exposed wires and pipes like sweat on a runner's skin. A bleach and brine scent purred under the heavier stink of old fuel and something else, paper perhaps, or the particular dust that collects in spaces where humans have stepped away. The hull creaked like an old back settling into a familiar chair. Marina ran her fingers along control panels whose labels had faded to ghosts, toggles, and buttons worn smooth by hands not her own. She imagined her uncle here listening to these same sounds, his fingers trailing the same paths. "You kept secrets," she told the metal, her voice strangely flat in the confined space. "Did you keep them from me too?" She sat in the pilot's seat, its vinyl cracked and patched with duct tape, and closed her eyes. The submarine held her like a cupped hand and neither warm nor cold, just present. She let grief move through her like a low tide, receding slowly, leaving behind small treasures half buried in sand. Uncle Elliot showing Lucia how to change a faucet washer, his rough laugh when the water sprayed them both. The Christmas he brought her mother a music box that played something classical and melancholy, the way he always left without goodbyes, as if to avoid the weight of departure. Then something small disrupted the sadness, a memory she hadn't visited in years. Elliot laughing over a busted toaster saying, "When a needle won't point north, it's because north is hiding." He'd tapped the side of his nose, a gesture she'd never understood until this moment, sitting in his last project. A soft, rhythmic tapping interrupted her thoughts. She opened her eyes, the headlamp's beam bouncing wildly as she turned. The sound came again. 3 light knocks, then silence. Marina held her breath, suddenly aware of her heart beating against her ribs. The dock outside had fallen quiet, gulls asleep, water moving with the gentle hush of a mother, soothing a child. Tap, tap, tap. Not random, not settling metal or shifting currents, a pattern, a message or a coincidence she could not tell. But it felt like the edge of a curtain lifting on a dark room, revealing the barest suggestion of something waiting to be found. "Uncle?" she whispered, feeling foolish immediately. The dead don't knock, she reminded herself. They leave and take their explanations with them. She swept the bahia, headlamp across the interior again, more systematically now. The beam caught something she'd missed before, a small discoloration on the aft bulkhead, a rectangle slightly darker than the metal surrounding it. Marina moved closer, her fingers tracing the almost imperceptible seam. It could be nothing. A patch, a repair, one of the 1,000 small compromises that kept vessels afloat. Or it could be a door. The next evening, she brought Lucia. The girl had begged all day, her eyes bright with a curiosity that made Marina's chest ache with love and worry. They crossed the dock as twilight thickened around them, the city's lights coming on like distant stars. The day tasted like rain and possibility. "Will we see inside it?" Lucia asked, her hand warm in Marina's. "The adventure?" Marina smiled at the name. Of course, Lucia would see it that way, not as an embarrassment or a burden, but as the beginning of a story. "Yes," she answered. "We'll see inside the adventure." Lucia's eyes widened as they descended into the submarine, her breath making small clouds in the chilled air. It smells like a hardware store, she giggled, then went solemn, the way children do when suddenly confronted with the weight of adult concerns. Is it safe? As long as we listen, Marina said, thinking of the taps, the seam, the possibilities that whispered from the metal walls. Lucia's eyes, brown and bright in the glow of the headlamp, scanned every dial and gauge with a reverence Marina had never seen her give to toys or screens. Suddenly the girl froze, head tilted like a bird hearing a distant call. There, she whispered, pointing toward the aft bulkhead where Marina had noticed the discoloration. It's knocking like in my music class. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. She pressed her ear to the riveted steel, her small body perfectly still with concentration. Hollow. Marina laid the stubborn compass on a nearby pipe. Its stuck needle trembled, quivered, then swung weakly as if nudged by a small, insistent magnet. Lucia's mouth formed a perfect O, a silent exclamation of wonder that needed no words. The bulkhead wore its secrets like makeup that had begun to fade, revealing something underneath. The panel Marina had noticed, the size of a kitchen drawer, seemed suddenly obvious, its edges distinct against the surrounding metal. She ran her fingers along it, felt a slight give, then a notch. She wedged her house key into the seam and pried gently, then with more force. Metal squealed against metal, reluctant but yielding. A rectangle of darkness opened, exhaling air that smelled faintly of machine oil and something paper dry like old books or forgotten letters. Inside lay a watertight cylinder, sealed with a hand-turned cap slick with old grease. Lucia clapped once, quiet as prayer. The cap resisted, then surrendered with a cough of compressed air. Marina slid out a bundle wrapped in waxed canvas. A letter in Elliot's sharp slant, a worn notebook, with a marbled cover and 3 hard cases, the kind people use for cameras or delicate instruments. Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter, its creases deep and permanent. The letter said little and everything. If you found this, you listened. I put the only decent thing I ever did where only patience could claim it. Don't trust the loud or the shiny. Take the notebook to Mariner's Bank on the 24th. Ask for Savita Patel. Tell her the tide's turned. Marina read it twice, then again, the words swimming before her eyes. Uncle Elliot's handwriting was as she remembered, sharp angles and deep pressure, as if each letter was fighting to exist. A drop of condensation fell from a pipe overhead, landing on the paper with a soft pat. She quickly folded it, protecting it from the submarine's damp breath. What does it say? Lucia whispered, her face illuminated from below by the headlamp, creating shadows that danced across her cheeks. In the strange light, she looked both younger and older than her 10 years, caught between childhood curiosity and an understanding beyond her age. It's directions, Marina answered, her voice steadier than she felt. From Uncle Elliot. He left us a map. Lucia's eyes widened. Like treasure? Maybe. Marina opened one of the hard cases, the clasp resisting slightly before surrendering with a satisfying click. Inside, nested in custom-cut foam, lay a small electronic device she didn't recognize. Rectangular, with a tiny display screen and a series of buttons worn smooth from use. No manufacturer's name, no serial number. The second case contained what appeared to be a data storage device, sealed in a vacuum-packed bag with desiccant packets. The third case was slightly larger, its exterior scratched and dented as if it had traveled far and roughly. Marina's fingers hesitated over the latches, a strange electricity running through her body. This wasn't just a message from the dead, it was a door opening. Can I? Lucia asked, her small hands already reaching. Marina nodded, watching as her daughter carefully flipped the latches and lifted the lid. The headlamp's beam fell on a collection of official-looking documents, certificates with gold seals, legal papers with signatures in blue ink, and a small leather-bound book with no title on its spine. It's boring grown-up stuff, Lucia said, disappointment evident in the slump of her shoulders. Marina smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. Sometimes the most important things look boring at first. Like books with plain covers that have the best stories inside. They examined the notebook next, its pages filled with columns of numbers, stock ticker symbols, dates stretching back 15 years, and notes in Elliot's cramped handwriting. The margins contained observations about companies, market trends, and occasional personal comments. R&D promising, management change, watch. Carefully, reminds me of the Kingfisher project. What's a ticker symbol? Lucia asked, leaning against Marina's side, her warmth a small sun in the cold submarine. It's a short name for a company on the stock market, Marina explained, flipping through pages that documented what appeared to be investments, purchases and sales, reinvestments and dividends. Patterns emerged like constellations. Elliot had focused on marine technology companies, robotics, environmental monitoring systems. Fields Marina had never heard him discuss, interests he'd kept hidden behind his grease-stained hands and quiet ways. Look, Lucia said suddenly, pointing to a page near the back. That's today's date, but from last year. The entry was circled in red, with a single word beside it, matured. Marina checked the date again, calculated backwards. You're right, she said softly. Exactly 1 year ago. They stayed in the submarine until the chill became unbearable, Lucia's teeth chattering despite being wrapped in Marina's scarf. As they climbed out of the hatch, the night air felt almost warm by comparison, carrying the scent of nearby restaurants and distant rain. Can we go to the bank tomorrow? Lucia asked as they walked back toward the bus stop. I want to meet Savita. Marina hesitated. Tomorrow was a workday, 3 houses in Magnolia, clients who didn't tolerate cancellations. Soon, she promised. Very soon. That night, unable to sleep on the fold-out sofa, Marina examined the notebook under the weak light of a reading lamp with a fraying cord. She was no financial expert, but the numbers told a story she could almost grasp. Investments growing, splitting, multiplying like cells dividing. Uncle Elliot, who lived in a small apartment filled with salvaged electronics and who wore the same patched coat for 20 years, had been quietly building something. Not wealth for its own sake, it seemed, but a purpose with the patience of tides. In the morning, she called in sick for the first time in 2 years, her voice cracking with the deception. The client's irritation buzzed through the phone. This is very inconvenient, Marina. But for once, she didn't apologize. Some emergencies were invisible to others, but no less real. Lucia wore her best sweater to school, the one with only a small hole in the sleeve, easily hidden if she kept her arm bent just so. I'll be good, she promised as Marina walked her to the classroom door. Extra good so we can leave right after. Just be yourself, Marina told her, straightening the collar of her daughter's sweater. That's always enough. While Lucia learned fractions and state capitals, Marina visited the public library using a computer to search for information about Mariners Bank. It was small but established, with a single branch on 24th Avenue in Ballard, less than a mile from the marina. The website showed a modest building with blue trim, listing services for local businesses and families. Nothing special, nothing that hinted at secrets or fortunes. She searched next for Savita Patel and found little. A LinkedIn profile showing 20 years at the bank, rising from teller to manager. A mention in a local business journal from 5 years ago. A photo from a Chamber of Commerce dinner where she stood at the edge of the frame, wearing a cardigan the color of fog. The afternoon stretched like taffy, minutes sticking to each other. Marina paced their small apartment, reorganizing the meager contents of their pantry, folding and refolding the clean laundry. The notebook and cases sat on the kitchen table, both promise and puzzle. She kept returning to them, touching the covers, opening and closing the latches, as if repetition might reveal new secrets. At 3:30, she collected Lucia from school. The girl burst through the doors like a cork from a bottle, backpack bouncing, words tumbling out about tests and lunch trades, and a science project involving magnets. Marina listened, nodding at all the right places, while her mind circled the bank, the notebook, the tides turned. They took the bus to Ballard, sitting near the front where the engine's rumble vibrated through the floor. Outside the windows, Seattle slid by in its afternoon routine. People hurrying between coffee shops and offices, delivery trucks double-parked, a street musician playing saxophone on a corner, the notes lost in the traffic noise. "Do you think Uncle Elliot was rich?" Lucia asked suddenly, her voice low as if sharing a secret. "Is that why he had those papers?" Marina considered the question, remembering Elliot's apartment with its mismatched furniture and walls, lined with shelves of salvaged parts. "I think he had something important," she answered carefully. "Important enough to hide and to make sure we found it." Lucia nodded, satisfied with the answer in the way children sometimes are when adults tell them the truth without simplifying it. She took Marina's hand as they got off the bus, her palm warm and slightly sticky from a candy the bus driver had given her. Together they walked toward Mariner's Bank, the notebook secure in Marina's bag, the compass heavy in her pocket. Above them, gulls wheeled against a sky threatening rain, their cries like questions no one had thought to ask. Word travels on docks the way wind does, invisible but impossible to stop. By Monday morning, a small crowd had gathered near the entrance to Mariner's Bank on 24th Avenue. Some pretended to check their phones or admire the window display of a neighboring bakery, but their attention kept drifting toward Marina and Lucia as they approached the bank's blue trim door. Sterling Caldwell stood among them, wearing a different but equally expensive peacoat, his posture suggesting he'd just happened to be passing by. When he caught Marina's eye, he raised a hand in greeting that felt more like a claim. "Just ensuring city interests," he said, his voice carrying in the morning quiet. "That vessel is still technically a hazard." Marina nodded without speaking and guided Lucia forward, her hand gentle on her daughter's shoulder. The girl clutched her notebook, the one with fairy stickers and orca drawings, as if it might help interpret whatever awaited them inside. The hard cases from the submarine were secure in Marina's tote bag, heavy against her hip like anchors. The bank's foyer smelled of floor wax and maple from a small wooden dish of candy by the door. A security guard nodded as they entered, his face impassive but his eyes curious. The lobby was modest, 6 teller windows, 3 of them occupied, and a small waiting area with chairs upholstered in navy blue. Posters advertised boat loans and retirement accounts with images of sailboats at sunset and silver-haired couples walking on beaches. Through the glass front, Marina could see Sterling and others lingering, their breath fogging the morning air as they talked in low voices. A gull landed on a nearby lamppost, its white form stark against the gray sky. "May I help you?" asked a teller, a young man with a neat beard and carefully ironed shirt. "We need to speak with Savita Patel," Marina answered, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "It's regarding Elliot Alvarez." The name worked like a small key. The teller's expression shifted from professional politeness to something more alert, more engaged. "One moment," he said, picking up a phone and speaking in tones too low to hear. Minutes later, a woman emerged from a corridor behind the teller stations. Savita Patel, Marina presumed. She was in her 40s, with calm hands and a cardigan the color of fog, just as in the Chamber of Commerce photo. Her hair was gathered in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, secured with what looked like ordinary pencils. She wore no jewelry except small silver earrings shaped like leaves. "Miss Alvarez?" she asked, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm dry and warm. "I've been expecting you." "Please come to my office. Your daughter is welcome too, of course." They followed her down a hallway lined with framed photographs of Ballard's waterfront through the decades. Fishing boats from the 1920s, salmon canneries, the locks being constructed, modern pleasure craft. Savita's office was small but precisely arranged, with a window overlooking a courtyard where a Japanese maple dropped red leaves onto a stone bench. "Please sit," Savita said, gesturing to 2 chairs facing her desk. "Would you like some tea or hot chocolate for your daughter?" Lucia looked up at Marina, hope written across her face. "Yes, please," Marina answered. "That would be nice." While Savita stepped out to request the beverages, Marina took in the office, the degrees on the wall from the University of Washington, the family photo of Savita with an older couple who shared her eyes. A small model of a fishing trawler displayed on a shelf. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that suggested secrets or hidden fortunes. When Savita returned, she sat not behind her desk but in a chair next to them, creating a circle rather than a barrier. "I knew your uncle," she said simply. He was a customer here for over 30 years, a very private man, but one of absolute integrity. Marina nodded, unsure what to say. She removed Elliot's letter from her bag and handed it to Savita, watching as the woman read it, her expression revealing nothing. "The tide's turned," she said when she finished, returning the letter with careful hands. "That was our signal. He said you would come when you were ready." "I don't understand," Marina admitted, acutely aware of Lucia's attention, the girl's body tense with anticipation beside her. "Let me see the notebook, please," Savita said. Marina passed it over, along with the documents from the hard case. Savita examined each page, comparing entries to something on her computer screen, checking signatures against examples in a file she retrieved from a cabinet behind her desk. A bank assistant arrived with a tray holding tea in porcelain cups and hot chocolate topped with whipped cream for Lucia. The rich scent of chocolate filled the small office, homey and incongruous against the backdrop of financial mysteries unfolding. Savita finished her examination, closed the notebook with a gentle snap, and folded her hands on her desk. Her eyes, dark and steady, met Marina's. "Your uncle had a remarkable mind for patterns," she began. "Not just in the machines he fixed, but in markets, in opportunities others miss. Years ago, he helped start a maritime robotics company, provided technical expertise while others supplied the capital. His stake was small, but significant." She turned her computer screen so Marina could see a graph trending upward over time. The company was eventually acquired by a larger firm, which was then acquired by an even larger one. At each stage, the value increased. Your uncle consolidated the proceeds and set up a trust that matured last year. After taxes, fees, and sales, the balance transferred to a dormant account awaiting your claim. Marina's mouth felt suddenly dry. She took a sip of tea that she couldn't taste. "What balance?" she asked, the words barely audible. "The total is $88 million, Savita said, voice steady as if discussing the weather. The room did not breathe. A teller's pen clicked in the distance and stayed clicked. Lucia squeezed Marina's fingers so tight it hurt, leaving sticky chocolate fingerprints on her skin. Marina's vision swam, then steadied on Savita's eyes. Anchored, kind waiting. "That's not possible," Marina whispered. "I assure you it is," Savita replied. "Your uncle was quite thorough in his documentation and planning. Everything is in order. The trust specifies that you are the sole beneficiary, with provisions for your daughter's education and a percentage allocated to a marine conservation foundation he supported." Outside the office door, murmurs had begun to gather like clouds. The news was already spreading, bank employees whispering, customers lingering, the story moving invisibly through the building and beyond. Marina could almost feel the vibrations in the air, the shift in how the world perceived her. Sterling Caldwell appeared in the doorway, his face arranged in what he clearly thought was a winning smile. "Well, if you'd like to expedite removal of the vessel, the Marina can..." Marina turned to him, not with triumph, but with the patience of tides. "You made me small in front of strangers," she said, voice low and even. "Today I won't make you small in return. But I will remember." Sterling's smile faltered, uncertainty creeping into his eyes. He nodded once, sharply, and withdrew without another word. Savita watched the exchange with quiet approval, then turned to Lucia. "Would you like to press the button that prints the confirmation?" she asked. Lucia nodded solemnly and followed Savita to a printer in the corner, her small finger hovering over the button as if it might burn her. "It's okay," Savita assured her. "It's yours to press." Lucia pushed the button, and the machine hummed to life, its bright, busy music filling the office as it produced pages of financial statements, account numbers, and transfer authorizations. People at the windows turned, some ashamed, some beaming, some wiping eyes they swore were only from the cold outside. Marina sat very still, watching her daughter collect the warm pages, careful not to smudge them with her chocolate-sticky fingers. The justice unfolding was not revenge. It was a room learning a new way to look at a woman who had always been there, always been whole, but never fully seen. "He left a message for you," Savita said, handing Marina a sealed envelope from her desk drawer, "to be delivered upon completion of the transfer." Marina took it with steady hands, feeling the weight of paper and words waiting to be read. She would open it later, in private, when she could hear Elliot's voice in her head without an audience. "What happens now?" she asked, practical even in this moment of transformation. "Whatever you want," Savita answered simply. "The money is yours. The choices are yours, but I'd be happy to help you navigate the options if you'd like." Lucia returned to Marina's side, careful not to wrinkle the pages she carried. "Mom," she whispered, "does this mean we get a porch?" Marina laughed, the sound startling her with its freedom, its release. "Yeah," she said, pulling her daughter close, breathing in the scent of chocolate and childhood. "Yes, we get a porch. And whatever else we need." Outside, rain had begun to fall, washing the streets clean, drumming on the bank's roof with fingers of silver. Seattle continued its Monday business. Buses hissed by, umbrellas bloomed like sudden flowers, coffee shops steamed their windows opaque. But inside the small office, the world had tilted on its axis, revealing a new horizon, where dignity was not something to be earned, but something finally recognized. In the weeks that followed, the submarine didn't vanish into scrap, as Sterling and others had predicted. Instead, Marina had it lifted from the water by a specialized crane, its dripping hull swinging gently above the dock, while onlookers gathered with expressions ranging from curiosity to embarrassment. The same people who had snickered now watched in silence as professionals cleaned and stabilized the vessel, brushing away rust until the metal remembered itself. Marina hired naval engineers who spoke with respect about the sub's construction, about how it had been built to last despite years of neglect. "Good bones," one woman said, tapping the hull with a knuckle, the sound ringing true and clear. "Your uncle knew what he was looking at when he bought this." Rather than sell it for scrap or let it return to the water as a novelty, Marina donated the submarine to the Ballard Community Center as a hands-on classroom for kids who wanted to learn about marine engineering, navigation, and the physics of submersion. The space filled with the scent of oil soap and young voices, little fingers tracing rivets and asking questions that adults had forgotten how to ask. High school students painted a mural along its side, an underwater landscape where imagination and science swam together in currents of possibility. "It was always meant to teach," Marina told the community center director as they watched a group of third graders crowd around the control panels, their faces lit with wonder. It just needed someone to listen to what it was saying. With some of her inheritance, a word that still felt strange on her tongue, like a food she'd never tasted, Marina bought a modest house in Greenwood, not far from Lucia's school. It had a narrow porch with white columns and enough space in the back for a small garden. A maple tree dropped gold onto the walkway in fall, its branches reaching toward the second-story windows where Lucia had chosen a room painted the color of sunrise. Their first morning there, Marina stood on the porch in bare feet, feeling the rough texture of wood against her skin, listening to birds announcing territories and garbage trucks making their steady rounds. Coffee steamed in her hands, dark and chocolate warm, the expensive kind she'd once only smelled in the houses she cleaned. Lucia sat nearby in paint-spattered overalls, sketching the porch light with a careful tongue between her teeth, determined to capture exactly how the morning sun transformed ordinary metal into something luminous. Inside, their sparse belongings looked almost lost in the legitimate space of a real home. The fold-out sofa repurposed as regular seating, Lucia's notebooks finally having a desk of their own, kitchen cabinets waiting to be filled with more than just the essentials. They had kept Marina's brass compass, its cracked face and stubborn needle now displayed on the mantel like an art piece, a reminder of where they had been. News traveled further than the docks. Neighbors brought cards and casseroles, introducing themselves with handshakes that acknowledged Marina as an equal. Former clients called with congratulations moms that contained hints of regret for what they might have missed in the woman who had cleaned their homes. The landlord's voicemail, once stern with warnings about late rent, arrived now with apologies and offers to return their security deposit with interest, his voice oddly thin and eager to please. Even Sterling came, hat literally in hand, to the opening of the submarine's classroom. His peacoat had been replaced by a sweater that seemed deliberately casual. His usual confidence dimmed to something approaching humility. "I misread the tide," he said, cheeks pink with more than just the October chill. Marina shook his hand, neither warm nor cold, simply present. "We all do," she answered, and meant it. In the evenings, after Lucia had finished her homework at the kitchen table that didn't wobble, Marina read Elliot's final letter. His words were few but precise, like the man himself. "I never had children. Never thought I was meant for it. But watching you raise Lucia showed me what courage looks like without announcing itself. The money was luck and patience. The sub was always for the girl, something to make her see that rusty things hold wonders if you look long enough. Tell her to keep listening. The world speaks in taps and whispers that most people sleep through." Marina enrolled in night classes at Seattle Central, picking up her education where necessity had forced her to set it down years before. She studied business and environmental science, two fields that seemed both contradictory and complementary. Some of Elliot's fortune went to establish scholarships for students from agricultural communities, named not for him, but for Marina's parents, who had picked apples and hops until their backs curved like question marks. On a gray Saturday in late November, Marina stood at the harbor with Lucia, watching ferry boats shoulder through the water toward islands that floated like dreams on the horizon. The air tasted of salt and wood smoke from a nearby boat where someone was grilling despite the chill. Each ferry sent a patient heave across the water, ripples that traveled outward in expanding rings until they touched the shore where mother and daughter stood. "Mom," Lucia said, leaning into Marina's side, her body warm through layers of new wool. "Do you think Uncle Elliot knew we'd find it?" "The secret compartment, I mean." Marina considered the question, watching a seagull settle on a piling, its white feathers bright against the pewter sky. "I think he knew I'd have you," she replied at last. "And you hear things the world forgets to listen for." Lucia tucked her hand into Marina's coat pocket, closing around the cracked compass that Marina still carried some days, a habit not yet ready to be broken. "It doesn't have to point north anymore," the girl whispered, a wisdom in her voice that made Marina's heart catch. "We know where home is." Marina kissed her forehead, breathing in the clean, warm smell of her child's hair, a scent unchanged by fortune or address. Around them, the city lifted its daily symphony. Cranes swinging in slow arcs above construction sites, church bells marking the hour, gulls complaining to each other about territory, far voices calling across water. A world alive with ordinary mercy. The community center's banner snapped in the wind, bright blue against gray sky, announcing a weekend workshop where children would learn how submarines control their buoyancy. Marina had funded the program, but refused to have it named after her, preferring instead to watch anonymously as knowledge passed like a current from one generation to the next. "I was thinking," Lucia said, pulling a notebook from her backpack. A new one with a proper leather cover, but still decorated with fairy stickers preserved under clear contact paper. "Maybe we could start a thing where kids like me can learn to fix stuff. Like old radios and toasters and things people throw away. Uncle Elliot could be the name, but not his picture because he was private." Marina nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "I think he'd like that," she managed. "A lot." "And maybe," Lucia continued, warming to her idea, "we could have a submarine sleepover, where kids could spend the night in it and learn about ocean things, with hot chocolate." "With hot chocolate?" Marina agreed, smiling at her daughter's blend of practicality and imagination. They walked back along the waterfront, past shops where Marina could now afford to browse without anxiety, past restaurants where tables waited without the barrier of price. But they chose instead to visit the coffee kiosk where the vendor with gray threaded hair still worked, her eyes crinkling with recognition as they approached. "The usual?" she asked, already reaching for cups. "The usual," Marina confirmed, the simple exchange a bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming. Later, as evening drew its blue curtain across the city, Marina sat on their porch steps, listening to Lucia practice piano in the living room. A second-hand upright they'd found on Craigslist, its middle C, slightly out of tune in a way that gave each song a questioning lilt. The maple tree stood sentinel at the edge of their small yard, its last leaves clinging like memories not quite ready to let go. A neighbor walked by with a dog, raising a hand in greeting. A delivery truck rumbled past. Porch lights came on up and down the street, small beacons guiding people home as darkness gathered. Marina wrapped her hands around her mug, feeling its warmth against her palms, and thought about what she would tell Lucia someday when the girl was old enough to understand the full story. She would say what she had already begun to live, the lesson as simple as a tide and as complicated as a human heart. Love and dignity are treasures no one can steal. They remain when fortune fails, when compasses break, when the world looks away. They are what we give each other in the smallest moments, in the spaces between words, in the silence that follows 3 small knocks against metal, asking only to be heard.